Today, I'm joined by the associate editor of The Spectator, author and commentator Douglas Murray, who's coming from us from the Gaza border. How far is the Gaza border from where you are now, Douglas?
Best not to say.
Okay. Well, some distance from the Gaza border in Israel.
Yeah.
Douglas, thank you so much for joining us. It must be strange for you being there in the heat of the action, where the place that everyone's talking about, and seeing the debate about marches and flags and stickers and Suella Braverman in Britain. How's being there changed your perspective on the debate?
Well, it hasn't particularly changed my perspective on the debate back home in Britain. I've said since the beginning of this conflict that, it seems to me, Israel has its problems, and we could talk about that till the cows come home. It has its own challenges, but Israel can look after those challenges. That's the job of the government, that's the job of the IDF and others, and indeed the Israeli people. But we in Britain have our own problems. And the question is, can we look after them? Can our government in Britain address our problems? Can the British people rally to address our problems? Because I think that our problems have become very clear in last month, if they weren't before. So I'm not worried about Israel. Israel can look after itself. I'm worried about Britain.
It's funny, I've heard and myself have experienced Israelis saying to people here in the UK and also in the States, we're okay, we'll get through this. But how are you? How are you going to deal with what's happening there?
Well, many years ago now, I remember I was at a conference in Berlin with various Israelis and British and German and other European EU politicians. And I remember there was a sort of, I can't remember how long it is after an event that you're allowed to break Chatham House rules, but let me just assume that there was a representative who said to an Israeli, it's very, it's troubling the next time, you have another Gaza thing. The problem is we might have violence on our streets. And I said to this person in front of everyone else, I said, you have just done something utterly shameful. You have said to an ally that they effectively may not be able to operate as they want to operate and need to operate in their own interests because you don't have control of your streets, or you might lose control of your streets. That's a shame on you. Imagine if the Israelis or the Germans or anyone else said, no, look, the British government, you've got to do certain things or not do certain things, because if you do them, we're going to have trouble on our streets in Tel Aviv and so on. Sorry, that's your problem. So yes, I'm very worried that what is being exposed in this is problems in Britain. It's the British police who are exposed as being a problem. It's the British cabinet who are exposed as having trouble. It's the shadow cabinet that's exposed as having trouble. And this has nothing to do with Israel. It has to do with a very, very serious set of challenges on our own streets. And, we've been through this really difficult era with Met Police in particular, who I have some sympathy with because they sort of can't ever get anything right. There was a G20 protest many years ago in London, 12, 15, 13 years ago in London, where the poor homeless guy was bludgeoned by the police and died. And if you remember, there was a massive thing about police overreaction, and then the London riots broke out, and the police didn't step in, and then people were being killed on the streets because the police weren't there to protect them. Yeah. And then we get the Sarah Everard protest, where it seems Met Police are amazing, crack squad at arresting mourning women at a candlelit vigil. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant at getting in there, getting in.
And they had to pay two of them damages in the end.
Yeah, and then when it comes to people chanting jihad, intifada on the British streets, the Metropolitan Police stand back. So they have this very weird problem going on. But this is an example. I said this the other day, but you look at the attack on the Rugby Venus of Velasquez in the National Gallery. These maniacs just oil protesters taking hammers to a priceless work of art. And you think, we are in a stage in Britain where the body politic, the civic society seems so immunocompromised that almost anything can come in and cause us damage.
And I've argued consistently in my book is Israelophobia, but also more recently, that it's not fundamentally illegitimate or bad to raise and fly the Palestinian flag or campaign for the Palestinians.
Sure.
And that as we've seen in recent weeks with the way in which Israeli Arabs have really developed this patriotic support for Israel, Islam itself is not the problem. Do you agree with those two positions?
Well, I mean, it's the first one on the Palestinian flag. I mean, look, we've seen, I'm sure you've seen, the advice given out to protesters to make sure they effectively support Hamas without supporting Hamas, or chant within the limits of the law. Okay. I think it's very telling protesters need to have this advice, because it suggests they want to go a lot further than they've gone. I'm very wary about the whole sort of people who turn out from Palestinians in any situation, I have to say, because I think I'm just intensely suspicious of the whole debate around it. I don't believe that most of the Muslim marchers, most of the non-Muslim marchers are really bothered by the Palestinian people. I don't see any love for the Palestinian people that I travel to the Middle East. The Jordanians don't care for them. The Egyptians don't care for them. The Lebanese don't care for them. The Saudis don't care for them. None of them care for the Palestinian people. The idea that
even in Britain, protesters didn't care for them when they were being bombed by Assad. It's not about as much as the
idea that this is about the Ummah is ridiculous. It's a fictitious concept. The government of Pakistan is in the process of forcibly deporting 2 million people from Pakistan to Afghanistan. I'm sorry, I don't believe these people who say we're just worried about these people because they're fellow Muslims. No, they don't. They don't care at all about their fellow Muslims. Their fellow Muslims are killed all the time in Yemen and Syria by other Muslims. They're deported in Pakistan. You don't get these people turning out other than for this thing of the Palestinian cause. And the Palestinian cause is, in my view, simply not the Palestinian cause. It's an anti-Israel cause. And unfortunately, lots of anti-Semites have been deported into Europe in recent decades. I mean, you look at the march through Berlin the other day, post-war Germany seemed to me there wasn't any particular dearth of anti-Semites in Germany. But they import a lot of people who are anti-Semitic in a relatively new way for Germany. And I think that's Germany's tragedy. But no, so the first thing, I don't think that the Palestinian cause is, I don't think that people doing it are honest about what they're saying.
I mean, I think that certainly the context in which people have been raising the Palestinian flag now has been quite different to the one, in some cases, to the one before, because they were raising it pretty much the day of the massacres.
I went to the protest in Times Square to cover it the day of the massacre. They're all flying the Palestinian flag. I'm sorry, this isn't support for the Palestinian people. And also, my view is that the Palestinians were offered a state so many times, and they've rejected it so many times. And I mean, yeah, sure, it's legal to fly the Palestinian flag, and it should be, but we can also read into it what we would,
And it's being used as a proxy for the Hamas flag sometimes.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And the people rapping fear around that sort of terrorist chic. As for your second question about Islam, well, I have my views on Islam, but they're not going to be shared by everyone. I just would like to see Muslims more visibly able to not go nuts when Israel simply defends its own people. And, that's their problem. I mean, it's their problem that the one Jewish state in the world defending itself makes so many people so enraged. But that's their problem. I don't need to tell them, about that. I would rather that we weren't in this situation in countries like ours, but we are. But I refuse to have my opinions, as it were, constricted or prescribed by the realities that most people, including most politicians, cannot admit.
Sorry.
No, at any one time in politics, there is a sort of, well, of course everyone knows that, but we can't say it. Okay, fine, but I'm not a politician, so I can say it.
Yeah. There was some polling recently which showed that 4% of Muslims in Britain would support a terror attack, 83% wouldn't, and that's good and encouraging. 4% is still 160,000 people, but I think that it would be nice to see chants of free Palestine from Hamas.
Absolutely, and this is. I mean, where were the protests in 2006 when Hamas took over in Gaza and killed all the Fatah people, threw them off rooftops? Yeah. I mean, where are the protests in Britain or anywhere else about the fact that Mahmoud Abbas, the allegedly, moderate ally for peace, hasn't put himself up for election in how many years now? I mean, where are the protests about this? There's just an incredibly low resolution, simplistic view of everything that has dominated. And as I say, I think anti-Semitism exists always. I think it's ineradicable. I've written about this quite a lot. I think anyone who says we must destroy it once and for all doesn't know what they're talking about. And I think that. Oh, 1 second. I don't know how my phone started bleeping. Sorry, that was lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
You're saying that we can't eradicate anti-Semitism.
Sorry to spice that bit. I think that anyone who says, we want to eradicate anti-Semitism once and for all just clearly knows nothing about anti-Semitism. Yeah. But in my view, a lot of people don't realize what they're suffering from in terms of this. And they find anti-Israel sentiment a very fine release valve for all of the unhappiness and envy and hatreds in their own life. I mean, it seems obvious to me. It's a pathology. I don't need to tell you. It's a pathology, and it's one that exists in large numbers of people. I'm very sorry about that, Muslim and not.
Now, I don't know if you saw Bret Stephens' column this week in the New York Times, where he talked about how after 9/11 in Langley, the CIA HQ, there was a sign on the wall saying every day is September the 12th.
Yes.
And he was saying that for Jewish people, every day from now on is October the 8th. Mm-hmm. What lessons are the main lessons do you think that we're beginning to learn, both in Britain and around the world, from October the 7th that will change, that will be that game changer? Or what lessons do you think we should learn?
I mean, the Israelis are obviously in the process of learning a lot of lessons, and they're trying to, I think they're putting off what the lessons are until they've won the war, because it's very hard to sort of sit down and cogitate when you're fighting the war. But obviously, I mean, there are lots of lessons from the state of Israel to take about sort of reliance on tech, over-reliance on tech, being one of many. But, as I say, there's a war going on. It's not the time to work that out here. Everyone's got views. You'll be amazed to hear everyone in Israel has views. What the lessons are outside Israel, I would think, among others, a lot of Jews will have been, I know, genuinely shocked by the lack of empathy. It didn't last even a day. I think that's going to have an impact. My friend Norman Podhoretz some years ago wrote a book called "Why Are Jews Liberal?" Why do they vote Democrat, effectively, in America? And as you know, one of the most interesting developments in recent years in polling shifts in the UK has been the shift of tiny number of Jews in Britain. Of course, it's not significant electorally, but it's a very interesting phenomenon that Jews in Britain have gone in the last 20 years from voting left to voting right, from voting Labour to voting Conservative. and it's a very important development. I suspect in America there will be a similar shift, actually, because of the realization of just how much hatred is out there. I think a lot of Jews that I speak to are very concerned on multiple fronts. I mean, Israel is an answer to problems the Jewish people have suffered for millennia, and many people hoped it was sort of the answer. At least Jews can look after themselves and protect themselves and fight for themselves. This is a very, very important thing indeed. Now, I've known enough people who've made Aliyah in recent years from France and Britain and other parts of Europe because they see rising anti-Semitism in these countries. I think it's a deep shame for each of these countries, but that is something that has happened. I think there is a terrible trauma still going on that the 7th of October, the Jewish state could not protect the Jews. And I think that many people don't realize, I still think many people don't realize quite how massive the assault was. Around 4,000 terrorists spilled through the border. This was a battalion-sized attack. And remember, of course, a battalion-sized attack on such brave targets as a music festival and left-wing kibbutz and peacenik households and much more. And I think that much of the world still hasn't realized the just sheer enormity in a country the size of Israel that almost everybody here has been going from funeral to funeral, shiver to shiver, and that's going to go on for a while.
And in Britain, there's been a fascinating. I'm just having a look here. Here we are. A message that I received from an old university friend of mine, who got back in touch after many years, and she writes, "Jake, I'm sorry for unfriending you on Facebook. When you went to work for the Daily Mail, I thought you'd gone off the rails. I'm eating my words now." I think that it feels like this is a clarifying moment for British politics as well, whereby the left is radicalizing itself so much, not necessarily the Parliamentary Labour Party, but the grassroots is becoming so radicalized, not just in terms of anti-Semitism, but also in terms of gender ideology and colonialism and all the rest of it. But this is the worst, supporting or condoning or turning a blind eye towards genocide is a low that I think is ejecting sensible people from the left who are becoming politically homeless.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own political views, but I perfectly well respect the views of others. I don't expect everyone to agree with me, and I don't expect everyone to become conservative, with a small c, or right wing or anything like that. And, I just think that there will be a lot of people who will be amazed at what their allies have been doing. I mean, I was talking about this with somebody here this morning. Take an example like, why are the protesters turning up outside Marks and Spencer's? Why? What has Marks and Spencer's got to do with the war in Gaza? Founders were Jews. I wonder, let's just accept as a fact, most people are ignorant about everything, particularly about history. I wonder if these people even know that one of the founders who led Marks and Spencer's was the target of Carlos the Jackal in, was it 1971 or so, in London, who did a hit job, an employed hit job, to try to kill one of the bosses of Marks and Spencer's because he was Jewish, and did so on behalf of Palestinians. Can you imagine if you were a Jew who lived, let's say, 3 decades longer than we had, which is still not very old, and had seen all of this come around, and you get a hit job for being Jewish and having a store, And even decades later, the bigots turn up outside which store? Marks and Spencer's again. This just horror of ignorance, the horror of these people and I see them. They are these protesters who think they are Antifa, that they're anti-fascist, that they are anti-Nazi. If they got what they wanted, if they got what they chanted, they would fulfill Hitler's dream. And so it's one of very many reasons why these people mustn't get what they want. But imagine if they did. Imagine if they did. I wonder if these people would realize that it was them that was the Nazis. It was them that was Hitlerites. You know, I mean, we've been here again before. German politics post-war, there was one thing you were meant not to be, and that was don't be a Nazi. Don't do what our parents did in Germany. You know, that was the one thing that oriented them. But there were members of the Green Left and others who actually ended up, partly because of the Palestinian cause, people like Joschka Fischer's old roommate, ended up organizing separations on hijacked planes of Jews and non-Jews. So, done it again. The whole wheel can go around like that. And we've seen that before with anti-Semitism. And we're seeing it at the moment. These people are that are marching on the streets. I'm not talking about the Muslim marches, I'm talking about the non-Muslim marches, are principally driven by a belief that they are sort of on the right side of history or doing the right thing, on the side of the underdog. And they couldn't be more wrong. And I just hope and pray that they never find out the actual consequences of what their suggestions would be.
And when it comes to the commentariat on the left, when October the 7th happened, there was this deafening silence, because it was almost like the weight of cognitive dissonance was such. They could no longer, how could they compute the idea that the side that they had supported had perpetrated this horrendous set of atrocities? But very quickly it discovered its voice, where it sort of recoiled from the facts and the reality and fell back into its comfortable football game. I support this side and Israel's doing the genocide, despite the fact that clearly Hamas had tried to do so.
Yeah.
What is going on the left that apparently decent left-wing people cannot find it in themselves to stand up for the Jews? Only the right, it seems to me, at the moment, is standing up for the Jews. What does it say about the left?
Well, there are certain things where people are willing to put up with a certain amount of atrocity in order to get to where they believe they want to go. So let me say one I can say it to you, because we're not doing this in America. This would be an unpopular point to make in America. It seems to me in America, for instance, people on the right and elsewhere who are very big proponents of Second Amendment rights, gun ownership, who don't want any limitations on gun ownership, who don't want any, who want as few restrictions on gun ownership as possible. Whenever a school massacre comes along, they have a problem. And the way I see it, they've sort of built in, well, okay, these things happen and it's terrible, but it's not as terrible as us losing our Second Amendment. Okay, that's just like what they have in them. And I'm not judging them, not my place to judge. But I think something similar is happening with the people who see themselves as being pro-Palestinian. That they believe that the reason there isn't a Palestinian state is because the Jews have stopped getting a Palestinian state. They think if they just push more, such a state will occur and peace will break out, not just in Israel, Palestinian state, but across the Middle East. Of course, it's been a provenly defunct version of things for many years now, not least shown by the Abraham Accords, and get around and make sure actually that the Palestinians do not have the veto power on peace in the Middle East. And there's a block that you can't unblock, you go around the block. And that's exactly what the Israelis and Americans and others did with Abraham, of course. But if you believe that the main thing has to be the Palestinian state at all costs, free Gaza at all costs, and so on, something like October the 7th is just something you have to kind of get around somehow, or wish away, or, I mean, they'll never confront it. They'll never confront it because, I mean,
nothing arises without a context is the argument that they've been making.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to know what the context was for the Music Festival massacre. What was the context for that? Look at these horrible young men and women on the streets of Britain, marching and defending. I mean, many of them would have been at exactly just such a rave, you know? They could have been so easily. I want to know what the context of that is. What is the context in which you can...
Well, it can't be the occupation, because Gaza has not been occupied since 2005.
And what about, what about the way in which, for instance, people say that this is because of, I don't know, intransigence on the Israeli side? Why go into kibbutz where, I mean, the terrorists of the 7th of October didn't make any differentiation between left wing and right wing. In fact, they even killed, eye workers and others who were working on kibbutz.
Yeah. A
couple of days ago, it was in near Oz, a small kibbutz of 400 people. More than 80 were kidnapped and stolen into Gaza, and more than 30 were murdered right there. And I mean, many of the people in this kibbutz, they were left wing, peace now, types, and many of them actually were the sorts of Israelis who really, really made a virtue of trying to work with Palestinians in Gaza, employ Palestinians in Gaza, befriend them, help them. There was one woman who constantly would find meaning by driving Palestinian children to the hospitals and getting help for them.
From Gaza.
Yeah. None of this counted for anything for the people who came door to door in that kibbutz on the morning of the 7th of October. They didn't care what the views of these people were. And, they burned an elderly man alive in his home and shot everyone they could in their safe rooms. And there was one room I was in where 2 teenage boys, whose mother happened to be away that morning, were desperately trying to keep the door of their safe room shut. Can you imagine what it's like for, I think they were 13 and 16, what it's like to be in the safe room, which of course is a safe room to protect, and most of the houses have one, to protect you from bombs, because the bombs are so common. But the safe rooms didn't lock because they didn't expect to have to lock them from the inside. Every house, you saw the struggle that had happened as the Hamas terrorists fought to open the door. And on this occasion, 2 teenage boys on the other side desperately trying to keep the handle against grown men who would then usually shoot through the door. And you would see in each place the trail of blood on the floor where they had been stopped from being able to keep the door closed any longer. And this happened in house after house and room after room. And the Thai workers in their bit of a compound, the terrorists just went door to door. You could see from the bloodstains of the pulled out bodies most of the story of what happened, but the bomb shelter in that part of the kibbutz, a scene I would hope not very many people have to see in their lives, but it seems that Hamas put the Thai women and men into this one bomb shelter and then massacred them all. And I think not with bullets, because there weren't many bullet holes, but just bludgeoned and macheted them to death, because the blood splatter was all over the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the air conditioner, and you could see the bloodied handprints of people fighting the last moments of their lives to get up, imprinted on the walls. Why do I say this? Just because this is one of the things that happened, and that's one tiny part of what happened that day in one tiny community. And, find me the context for that. Find me the context.
I mean, these scenes obviously cause minds to be cast back to the Holocaust.
Mm.
And in your column for us this week, you made the argument that the Hamas terrorists seem to take even more relish in the massacres than some of the Nazis had done.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's not an argument, it's an observation.
Yeah.
I don't make any argument about this, because we're dealing here with very slight fractional differentials of the most pure evil that human beings have seen. So,
as we speak, a Twitter storm is raging about in which we're being accused of diminishing the horrors of the Nazis.
And I mean, anyone who makes that claim is obviously either capable of deliberately trying a move. By the way, this move is quite commonplace. Let me very quickly explain this. It's simply that having seen the raw footage of the 7th of October massacres, one thing that struck me was the glee in the terrorists' faces. That, shouting Allahu Akbar gleefully with every blow of the shovel against a young Jewish man's neck till they get the head off. And the gleefulness, I mean, one of these tapes has been released by the Israelis of one of the Hamas terrorists calling back to his mother and father in Gaza and saying, "Father, your son has killed 10 Jews with his own hands, and I've made you proud, Father, get mother on the phone." And this is a level of evil which we would spend our whole lives trying to comprehend and still fail. But I was struck by the sheer glee of all the attackers. And until somebody has seen all of this, of what I've seen, what others have seen, I don't think they have the right to make a judgment on this. My observation is that I think this is a level of evil that even the Nazis didn't quite achieve. Because, as I point out in my column, I spent a lot of time studying what happened in the 1930s and 40s in Germany. And one of the things that is very striking is that some level, a lot of the Nazis, members of the SS groups and the killing squads and so on, must have known they were doing something wrong. Why? Because they knew they had to try to do it in secret. Even when the Soviets are moving forward, there must be a reason why the Germans knew they had to cover over Treblinka. They didn't say, "Okay, world, you're coming in. We're going to show you our glorious achievements." Now, this isn't in any way, obviously, to absolve or let off the hook or diminish what Nazis did. But it's an interesting observation in my mind that the Hamas terrorists are so happy about what they're doing, so proud of what they've done. But then let me make my second very quick point about this. Twitter storms, you say, Twitter storms come and go. I care not a jot. But here's what these people are doing. They try, the people who actually celebrate the murder of Israelis, there's a horrible piece of work. I can't remember her name, but somebody at that far left thing, Novara Media, she celebrated the attacks of October the 7th immediately, gleeful about them, and expressed her glee on Twitter. That turned out to be a bit much. I am told that she's one of the ones who's left on my column this week in the JC. This is very commonplace. It's a tactic of a certain type of anti-Semite. What they do is they celebrate the murder of Jews, and then when they are trying to find an exit strategy from their own disgrace, they pretend to be wildly oversensitive about any mention of Nazis. I've seen this many times. It's a play, it's a tactic, it's a trick. Because, of course, as I say, they're simply looking for a quick exit route from their own depravity. Anyone who reads my column in JC this week who can read will know exactly what I've said, and I stand by it. And, one of the things that I've said quite a lot in recent years is that one of the problems of the age of social media is that we until very recently used to communicate as human beings by trying to make sure that we used our words as precisely as possible so that they couldn't be misinterpreted by any reasonable reader or actor. But we live in a new era now where unreasonable people will deliberately misinterpret and misread and misrepresent perfectly clearly worded views. That's not my problem. That's the problem of the illiterates and the anti-Semites and others who are just trying to find a way out from their own depravity. I find that their mewings and their barkings don't affect me.
On that note, Douglas, good luck with the next period in southern Israel. And thank you for joining us, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.